So next up, we have Dr. Lawton, who's one of our esteemed professors of history at Cameron University. He's published books, published articles, all over the place, and he's here to kind of talk about the CCC and WPA in Southwest Oklahoma. Dr. Lawton Janda.
Thank you, Jason. Look, you guys are just like my freshmen. Nobody sits in the front row. Look at you. That's kind of funny. It is an absolute joy to be here. We historians always love when somebody besides us gets interested in history, and I think there's nothing more relevant, more meaningful, honestly, as a topic of historical study than the New Deal. I would tell you it's one of the best examples of enlightened government policy in the history of this planet, not just in the history of the United States. And it's an absolute tragedy that you and I as adults have been such bad stewards at making sure that young people know about it, particularly in a time when so many people seem to think the federal government can't do anything. It can do a lot, kids, if it's got the right leadership and it's focused on helping people, and the New Deal is one of the best examples you can find. Jason asked me to set the tone a little bit in terms of the context, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the time period. I know you know that the New Deal occurred in the 1930s and that in large measure it's a reaction to the Great Depression. One of the things you want to keep in mind, though, is how different the United States was back then. We have a population of around 330 million today. We were less than half that size in the 1930s. Our population's around 130 million. There's only 20 million cars in the entire country. So we are not a country that's entirely mechanized. A lot of families don't have cars, and just like then as now, most of those cars are concentrated in the urban centers. So in rural areas in the 1930s, there's people still using horses and wagons, right? The government has vehicles, but not every farm family did. Not every urban family did. Poverty is on a level that I think is very difficult for us all to appreciate. Now, you and I live in the 580, as we call it, and you may know that the 580 is the second poorest area code per capita in the entire United States. And I'm not hating on it, it just is what it is. And that doesn't mean that there aren't wealthy people here, right? There's pockets in Lawton and other areas as well. What I want you to understand, though, is that it's always been that way, and that it was way, 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 way worse in the early part of the 20th century, okay? Sometimes I tell the kids there's poverty and there's poverty, okay? You've got lots of people. It's not just unemployment. It's not just people with homes and farms foreclosed. It's rampant illiteracy. It's small communities with no schools. It's not enough food. One of the things I often tell the kids when you get to the World War II generation, because I've got data for that, is the average American soldier in the Second World War weighed 135 pounds. That was an average sized man. If you weighed 150, and went to college, you were a tackle on the football team. You were a tank. You were gigantic. You were a behemoth. 150. I'm well past that, and I'm not a big guy, right? I mean, and look, that's just a measure of how much people ate. It's a measure of where nutrition was. You got people that the poverty is on a level that's almost impossible to get our heads around, okay? And remember the Great Depression, in history classes when I have to skim over it for freshmen, well, you start with 1929, you talk about the stock market crash. But things had been terrible in Oklahoma far longer than that. There are some scholars who will tell you the Great Depression really kind of begins here after World War I. Because there's poverty off the chain anyway, and then after World War I, when the government stops buying up all the food to feed the army because the war's over, farm prices do this. Farmers struggle through the 1920s. Historians often call the 1920s the Roaring 20s, because for a lot of people, the economy's doing pretty well. You got a lot of new technological development, and a lot of new cultural changes. Radio, women's dresses come up off the floor. Shocking, okay? But farmers are the one group that do not do well in the 20s. So if you're an Oklahoma farmer, way out western Oklahoma, for example, out Hollis, Lusty, Duke, okay, maybe out in that area, you were suffering for 10 years before the Great Depression. And then the wheels came off. And then the erosion got off the chain, right? And you've got the Dust Bowl. which some scholars have often called the largest man-made ecological disaster in the history of the planet, because it's completely preventable. It's caused by too much farming and too much soil erosion, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. So all of that is going on. And when you think about the New Deal, the first thing I would tell you is it's fun to talk about the buildings, right? Particularly the ones that still exist, because that's tangible evidence of what took place. I was actually having flashbacks because I grew up in Edmond. I've been to the Armory a million times. When I was a little kid, I played in Stevenson Park, and they had a giant rocket slide. It was the coolest thing ever. And then every little kid, the minute you got to Stevenson Park, you hooked it for the rocket slide, because it was just a tall slide that's shaped like a rocket. But it was awesome. Anyway. All of us, I promise you, all of you have been touched by the New Deal. You have all been in New Deal buildings, whether you realized it or not. You have all seen evidence of the New Deal just driving around southwest Oklahoma. Anytime you see terraced crops in this part of the state, that's a legacy of the New Deal. Anytime you see crops planted, in a curvy way, that's an end, or when you think about the tree lines, you're driving through the middle of nowhere, you see these lines of trees, and they just happen to be every quarter mile, every section, and it happens to be right along the property line. Those are windbreaks. I promise you those trees were planted in the Great Depression. Those are not natural. They weren't there in 1890. So there's evidence of it all around us. Less than a half mile from here, there's an elementary school that my daughter attended called Whittier. New Deal built that building, okay? I teach on the campus of Cameron University, which is not far from here. Our physical plant still uses New Deal buildings, okay? They got the little WPA shields right there, 1940, okay? The challenge is that the New Deal is so gigantic that you and I can't get our heads around it, right? And the government doesn't have a master list of every single project. So it's not just that the old sites are falling apart, it's that we're forgetting. And that because the New Deal is not just about buildings, it's work relief and so on. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. I also wanted to tell you, as context, I'm such a cliche old professor, old yellow paper, weathered notes, that's such a, anyway. They still work. I tell the kids, don't mock me, they work, okay? Population of Oklahoma. It actually shrinks from 1932 to 1938. In 1935, our population is only 2.3 million. So, like the United States, Oklahoma is about half as big then, or less than half. Today, we're a little over 4 million. So we've grown since then, but much smaller population. Okay. Comanche County's entire population is 34,000. Okay. Lawton didn't really extend west of Sheridan. Cameron's out there on an island with a little gravel road running back to the main town that the university built. President canceled classes for 2 weeks and had all the students, all the boys, go out and build the road so that there was a road between downtown Lawton and Cameron. But there's I-44 is not there, US 62 is there, but there's very few settlements east of what today would be 44. There's very little west of what today would be Sheridan, and there's 34,000 people in the entire county. It's small, and it's rural, and it's poor, okay? The New Deal benefits Oklahoma more than any other state in the Union, okay? And I endlessly marvel at the number of people who hate on the federal government, and particularly because most of them are getting a check from the federal government once a month, but never mind, okay? You live in a state that is a testament to the power of and I'm not saying the government's perfect, don't get me, but of the government to do good things, okay? When it's led by people who want to do good things and care about ordinary Americans, and right? And the wonderful thing about it is it's not just gigantic, okay? It's a partnership, because the government doesn't just come in and start handing out buildings. It partners with state and local and county officials. And it collaborates among federal agencies. I'm going to get to the CCC here in a second. The CCC, it's the War Department, it's the Labor Department, it's the Transportation Department, it's the Veterans Department, it's the feds, it's the state governments. And then they go into communities and they just say, hey, what do you need? And then they give it to them. And that's why every county, almost without exception, everybody gets a school, because that's what they ask for. Everybody gets a municipal building, because that's what they ask for, right? That's usually the bare minimum, those two things. Counties that had larger populations, that were more aggressive about asking for stuff, typically got more. Oklahoma City, Tulsa, larger population, they're going to get more CCC workers. They're going to get more WPA money because they've got more civic groups and they've got more organizations asking for them. Comanche County does pretty well, though. I'll get to that here in a second. Last thing I'll mention is this. I told you there were only 20 million cars in the entire United States. There's only 372,000 cars in this entire state in 1932. And most of them are in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. So again, okay, lots and lots of people, no running water, no central heat and air. A lot of them still don't have electricity in the 30s. Most of them still don't have phones in their home. Some scholars will tell you that, particularly for rural Americans, it's the New Deal that finally gets those folks out of the 19th century. Okay? Because if you're really poor on a really rural farm, it's 1890. It's horses and wagons, and you're pulling a manual plow, and if there's machinery to help once in a while, that's great. But it's difficult for everybody. Okay? All right, let's talk about the CCC first, because there's an endless alphabet soup of New Deal agencies, as you may know, and we certainly don't have time to talk about all of them. I will tell you, though, that when you think about the New Deal, Franklin Roosevelt conceptualizes it as a holistic approach to try and help get us out of the Great Depression, or at least to mitigate the damage from the Depression, to help people that are suffering, and to change the system. So his 3 R's were, the 3 R's, just like I teach my freshmen, it's relief, recovery, reform. So relief is help poor people. Food, clothing, housing, healthcare if they need it. Okay? That's immediate relief. Recovery is let's get money in people's pockets so they're spending it, right? To get the economy going again, right? Reform is let's reform the system so we don't get another Great Depression, and that's more of an abstract thing. You change laws, you regulate Wall Street, you regulate big businesses, and so on. Okay. Within that, Roosevelt calls for the creation of the Civilian Conservation Corps first. So the CCC comes before the WPA. Okay. And there's all kinds of other agencies. There are literally hundreds of them, and honestly, many of them don't work. One of the interesting things about Roosevelt is he didn't care if something worked or not. He'd try everything. He'd try 100 things, and if 10 of them worked, he'd ditch the 90 and keep the 10. And he didn't care if they overlapped, and he didn't care if there was inefficiency. Because his 2 guiding principles were, you got to get money in people's pockets. You got to give them hope. You got to convince them the government's trying to help them. Because there's a legitimate danger of revolution in the 1930s, because there's so much suffering and so much poverty. And beyond that, Roosevelt's concerned that people that stay in poverty too long eventually forget how to be heads of families and good fathers and good husbands, because they get psychologically and spiritually broken. So for him, it's not just a practical thing to fix the economy. You're trying to help people so that they can raise families and live productive lives and be happy. And the CCC targets young people, young men in particular. I presume you know, young men are, right, you don't want them unemployed in your society. That's right, unemployed, unhappy, angry young men with no hope. That's who joins terrorist organizations. That's who commits crime. That's who joins gangs. Right? And that's where those people recruit. You find hopeless people who think the system has let them down. You're like, it's not your fault. The system screwed you. Help me blow it up. That's your recruiting message. Right? And Roosevelt knows that. So, right? So the CCC, hold on here, because, there we go. Oh, God. Okay, right. Problem with professors is we get trained, we can only talk in 75-minute increments of time, so don't worry, I won't go that long. Okay. The CCC comes first. The goal is to provide labor for Reconstruction, and again, as I mentioned, it merges the War Department, Interior Department, Agriculture, and Labor to coordinate along with the VA. Enrollees had to be 18 to 25, male, unmarried, had to be citizens. They got paid $30 a month, and this is interesting, but they were required to send $25 a month home to their family. So they couldn't keep all 30 and go blow it on wine, women, and song. And that's important, because a lot of these rural communities, when a CCC camp shows up nearby, oh great, there's 200 unemployed young men nearby. Some of them don't want them. And so the government's very deliberate about saying, no. They're sending money home to their families, and they're nice young men, because the men are going to want to date the girls in the local town. And eventually, right, when it works well, and it does more often than not, you'll get social activities between the camp and the town, right? And the camps are mobile. They're there until a project is finished, and then they roll on. They move somewhere else, and they do their work, okay? The War Department runs the camps and all of the transportation. They get 250,000 people working within 3 months. Can you imagine? It's staggering. It's every state in the Union. And the War Department is providing the trucks and the tents and providing leadership. If you're familiar with George Marshall, he was Chief of Staff of the United States Army in the Second World War. I would argue he's the person most responsible for our victory in World War II, other than Franklin Roosevelt. Marshall is a major at the time, and he oversees several CCC camps out west. And at the end of his life, he looked back and he said it was the most rewarding thing he ever did. Because he was helping people. He was helping people improve their lives. He was helping communities build things that they needed and that they wanted. And he just thought it was great. He thought it was challenging and rewarding. In 1930, Oklahoma in 1934 had 5,000 men in CCC camps. At the time there were 26 camps, but that number is fluid because, again, the camps would set up someplace, do a lot of work, and then go somewhere else. Okay? Oklahoma uses the CCC to help build 7 new state parks. Well, a lot of states do that. There's not just work on national parks or national wildlife refuges like ours, Wichita Wildlife Refuge, but they'll work on Oklahoma state parks like Quartz Mountain here in this part of the state, or others around Oklahoma. It's interesting, there are also, eventually there are more than 85 CCC camps in Oklahoma. They were segregated though, because it's the 1930s, so the word they used back then was Negroes. They were all Negro camps. Interestingly enough, there were 5 camps that were completely for African Americans. One of them was at Fort Sill. So one of the endless number of things that's really distinctive and really unique about our part of the state that nobody knows about is that in the same way that Buffalo Soldiers, right, build the original post at Fort Sill, it's African American workers in the CCC camp adjacent to Fort Sill in the 30s that do most of the New Deal work, because there's a ton of New Deal work tied to the WPA in Fort Sill and around Lawton, and a lot of this done by African Americans. Okay? There were 6 categories of camps. They either worked on national parks, national forests, state parks, on soil erosion, or they did biological surveys. So there's a whole range of things that these workers work on. They also, in the camps, they had hospitals, they had kitchens, so they fed them, they took care of their medical needs, and they also had educational opportunities. The vast majority of these unemployed 18 to 25-year-old men are illiterate. So every camp taught reading, every camp taught practical skills. You could take courses in carpentry, you could take courses in, land management, okay? So it's not, and that's something that doesn't, right? A building might still be around to go stare and look at. But the human element, look, here's someone from the government teaching you to read. That's really cool, right? That's a hard thing for us historians to capture. It's a hard thing to capture in a museum unless you've got pictures of it. But to me, that's an even more important part of the story than the building. And the buildings are great, and so are the dams. Everybody loves showing pictures of, Tennessee Valley Authority dams, or the Fort Peck Dam, or certainly the dams on the Wildlife Refuge. That's what we try to get to. That's more of a WPA thing. But that human connection is very real as well. More than 100,000 Oklahomans eventually rotate through CCC camps. There's racism in a lot of them, because it's a racist period. But there's also a lot of cooperation. By 1942, Oklahoma had more CCC camps than any other state in the Union, and because the need here is greater. World War II eventually eliminates that. So the camps in our state included Quartz Mountain, Hobart, Sentinel, Clinton, Bangor, Wichita National Forest, that'd be us, Fort Sill, us, Rush Springs, and Duncan, also us, if us is this corner of southwest Oklahoma. So it's an extraordinary level of assistance from the federal government. All right. WPA comes next. WPA is 1935. In the initial round of New Deal agencies, Roosevelt created, and Congress, I should say Congress created, Roosevelt encouraged, Congress created, the Public Works Administration. And the PWA, Whittier Elementary, where my kid went, it's a PWA building. Okay. The PWA was supposed to be the big deal, and without getting into the weeds, the leadership of the PWA was a lot slower doling out money than Roosevelt wanted. He wanted the money to go flooding out to poor people. So by 35, he's so frustrated that he says, okay, let's have a new one. And he calls it, and eventually it's called the Works Progress Administration. It eventually is the largest New Deal agency of them all. It's going to commit around $8 billion between 35 and 1943. It's headed by Harry Hopkins, who was a close confidant of Roosevelt. And Hopkins gets the money going out there. I don't have time to laundry list you through everything, but I'm going to try and give you a sense of the range of things that they did. The CCC is deliberately about conservation, rural areas, employ unemployed young men. The WPA is wider ranging in its activities. To be in the WPA, okay, communities, groups could ask for federal money. And to get money, there had to be 3 criteria met. The project had to be useful. It had to be a project that fulfilled a need within the community, like a new school, a water plant, or an armory. It had to be sponsored by a public body, such as a city, school district, or county, although a lot of civics groups sponsor them as well. Lions Club, Civics Club, back in the day would sponsor these. And the sponsor had to contribute part of the total cost, usually between 10 and 25%, which was done through the contribution, usually, of locally available materials. That's why everything down here is built out of sandstone, because it was a lot cheaper to say, well, we'll contribute. You can have all the rocks you want for free, right? And so we were able to contribute with natural resources, and communities didn't have to pony up cash because they didn't have it, right? Number 3, 90% of the laborers had to come from employable persons, so this could be men and women, CCC was young men only, who were on the relief rolls. That's it. What do you need? You have to partner with us. You have to contribute in some money yourself. So it's not just a straight out handout from Uncle Sugar, it's let's do this together. Tell us what you need, okay? And then we'll start building it, right? There are conservation efforts. In Oklahoma alone, the WPA builds 3,600 miles of terrace lines. And if you don't know what those are, you take a flat piece of land where the wind has blown all the dirt away, and you elevate parts of it so that it has terraces in it, right? You create the terraces. The terraces help mitigate wind erosion. That's all terrace lines are, okay? They build 68,000 linear feet of levees. They build retaining walls. They plant 367,000 trees. They help reforest. There's another, and that's just for farmers on windbreaks. For reforestation, they plant 13 million trees. They build 625 nurseries. This is all just in Oklahoma, right? It's not national, it's in Oklahoma, right? So they build public buildings. Oklahoma gets more schools than any other state. We get over 825 schools through the WPA. Even today, and again, I marvel at this too, almost everything really nice that any poor community has, they got it from the federal government. I don't know how people can live there and go, oh, I just hate the government. I don't know. Anyway, but they do, right? Okay? The schools, the auditoriums, the community centers, the pools, the armories, almost without exception. And a lot of them will date back to the New Deal. The government builds civic centers, municipal buildings. I'll mention the ones locally here in a minute. Roads and bridges, okay? In Oklahoma, they build more than 2,700 bridges, more than 50,000 culverts, more than 300 miles of sidewalks. You can still find some sidewalks in Lawton that will have the WPA shield on it. Most of the municipal parks here were built by Uncle Sugar, built by the WPA. Okay, they build sanitation processing facilities. They build, and this will tell you something, they built 95,000 outhouses in Oklahoma. Okay? So it's not just that the poor didn't have in-house plumbing. They don't have outhouses in a lot of cases, or they don't have clean ones, or they don't have new ones. 95,000, and it's not just us. There are 2.4 million outhouses built nationally. A lot of those are deteriorated too, but the ones locally, they're always built with stone. You look for those same round rocks, those stones you look for when you go through the wildlife refuge, and you see a little tiny building out behind a farmhouse. I'll bet a month's salary it's a WPA outhouse. I'll just bet you it is. They build 38 sewage treatment facilities, 11 water treatment plants. They build nursery schools. They give vaccines. Shocking. They build hospitals. They support school lunch programs. Again, that's another thing that won't necessarily show up in a photograph of an old building. They do sewing rooms. Most people didn't have mattresses. And mattresses back then weren't the fancy box springs where you go buy one, and when it gets old you throw it out, and then you buy another one online and then you send it back because it didn't do what you thought it would do. Most people don't have them. And so in Oklahoma alone, people donate more than 1.7 million articles of clothing to the WPA, which is then redistributed to the poor. They set up classes to teach people to sew so that people can repair their own clothes, make their own mattresses, make their own curtains. They're not just sewing patches on jeans and I'm not picking on my mom. My mom did that back in the day. You young people missed out. In the 70s, I was wearing vertical brown striped pants. It was a weird time fashion-wise. Different shades of brown. I was like 9 years old on that 70s show. It was not a good look. Anyway, I finally forgave my mother. It's okay. It's all good. So, they offer home services. 94 million books nationally get repaired. They have mobile teams going around checking out books to areas that don't have libraries. They have teams going around repairing old books so that you don't throw them away. Okay? They do adult education. There's more than 15,000 Oklahomans that are taught basic literacy. They build most of the state parks in Oklahoma. They have youth programs for young people 16 to 25, art, music, theater, to keep them busy, to keep them learning, to help make them more productive, to give them something fun to do in the middle of a really horrifying time during the Great Depression. They support fine arts. Amy mentioned the murals, but they support theater presentations. There's the Federal Writers Project. In terms of national defense, we get more armories than any other state in the Union. We get 54, okay? Fort Reno, Fort Supply, Fort Sill all get massive WPA projects. It's sewage, it's barracks, it's office buildings. Holy City of Wichita blows my mind. The whole thing's supported by the WPA, and it is overtly religious. Roosevelt didn't care. I don't care if they want it. Okay. And so it's wonderful. It's the only WPA project in the entire United States that's that deliberately religious. There are 22 stone buildings and sewing rooms. They got it done in time for the Easter pageant in 1936 when 2,500 people were in the cast. That's not the audience, that's the cast to replicate the life of Jesus, which is kind of a small window into how religious people were in the 1930s, in the middle of the Great Depression. Okay? The final hour of that Easter pageant was broadcast across the entire United States, nationally, by NBC on the radio. We're a big deal down here, and nobody knows. Okay? In Comanche County, and I apologize, I'm going to laundry list because I'm getting short on time, but it's a ton, okay? The Comanche County Courthouse, the jail, the community building, the airport, the municipal auditorium, skating rinks, shelters, Legion Park, Union Park, Harmon Park, Mattie Beal Park, buildings on Cameron University, buildings on Fort Sill, Medicine Park's Fish Hatchery, the Highland Cemetery entrance, on and on and on and on. Every county in this part of the state gets schools. The bigger counties like Comanche County get multiple schools. And I'm talking about Chattanooga, Indiahoma, Phelps, Post Oak, Bethel, Prosperity, sometimes communities that don't even exist anymore. The road up Mount Scott, that's a WPA and a PWA thing. And one thing to keep in mind is that the federal agencies and programs are pretty good about cooperating with each other. So oftentimes the CCC and the WPA and the PWA and the Department of Treasury and some state or local entity, they might all end up cooperating on the same project. So it's not clean and easy to talk just about WPA projects or CCC projects. There's often overlap between them. And those are the two largest programs of the New Deal. So that's why I assume why you're focusing on them. And I think you should, because they're so important in Southwest Oklahoma. But there's lots of others as well. There are literally hundreds of other Southwest Oklahoma sites. Duncan gets multiple buildings. The Quanah Parker Dam and Lake is a CCC project. The Comanche gets stuff. Hollis, Hobart, Kiowa, Medicine Park. Lake Latonka is made bigger. The WPA raises the dam by 10 feet to make the lake bigger so that there's more water to feed the city of Lawton, okay, and the surrounding area. And we still get water from Lake Latonka, thanks to WPA, right? It's almost 100 years ago now, okay? Rush Springs has a company, and I think that's maybe where I'll end it. Company 884 was near Rush Springs. And the good people of Rush Springs, not too long ago, actually erected a historical marker to that CCC camp. Not many people remember the CCC, certainly not many communities choose to honor them with a historical marker. That marker says to all the young men who served and to future generations that they might be reminded of our government's efforts to improve the status of the unemployed during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Also to the U.S. Army and the Department of Agriculture for the guidance they provided both in camp and in the field, and the Rush Springs Lions Club for its efforts in securing the camp here. But the government can do good things. It's not perfect, but when it's led by people who care, and when we all pull together, because remember, it's cooperative, and we say, hey, here's a need that we have locally, here's people that are in need, can you help? And remember, the government's not some distant thing run by aliens. It's us. It's this. Particularly at its best, it's this. Okay? There's no limit to what we can do. Thanks for coming out today.